Hello, I'm retired Battalion Chief Larry Cockman, Chairman of the Greensboro Fire Department History Book Committee. The American Fire Service is rich in tradition and culture. A firefighter's life is filled with many emotional highs and lows. Stories of major fires, national disasters, medical calls, firehouse living, and family life are often verbally shared from one generation to another. Many times, these stories are lost forever when a firefighter passes away. In an effort to preserve these stories, in 2019, the Greensboro Fire Department History Book Committee launched a new program of recording audio-video of our retirees' lives. These stories will be shared on our website, gfhbc.org. In 2020, we did not record because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please listen as these firefighters share their life experiences with all of us.
Okay, my name is Charles Wesley Whitworth. I'm 66 years old. I retired from the Greensboro Fire Department with 39 years, and I retired at the rank of Assistant/Division Chief. Yes, I actually was born and raised in Greensboro. I grew up on the south side, east side of Greensboro for the majority of my childhood. And my grandparents lived over there off of now MLK, Ashboro Street as it's known then, right down from Station Forest, and I spent a lot of time there. So back late 60s, we moved out to Guilford County until I moved back when I got hired with Greensboro, because that was a requirement to live within the city. So, as far as to my knowledge, I'm related to a couple of people. One was my great-grandfather, Victor C. Osmond. I recently discovered that he was a volunteer fireman with Greensboro back in the early 1900s. He was a member of Eagle Hose Company number 7. I have documentation of where he was elected treasurer, I believe in 1918. And then in 1926, when Greensboro became a full-time department, he was awarded a honorary badge. I don't know where the badge is, but I do have the box it came in. And I have the newspaper article where he was listed as receiving that badge. And also doing some background of my family, particularly on that side of the family, I come across information that I am distantly related to Chief Alex Gossett. His grandmother, great-grandmother, and my great-grandfather, Osmond, were brother and sister. So, you know, that was kind of interesting to find out later on. And then my wife's cousin, Brent Gray, is on the fire department. Before coming to the fire department, I was a 19-year-old volunteer fireman, resident fireman, at Pinecroft-Sedgefield Fire Department Station 23 on Mackey Road. I was enrolled in the fire science program at GTI, now known as GTCC, and you know, having a great time. I entered the fire science curriculum right after high school, and I was pretty much completed my education because I could take more classes since I wasn't working anywhere. And I was putting out applications to several departments. Even I put one to Atlanta Fire Department. I've got a lot of responses back. Greensboro responded back. Atlanta responded back. They offered me a job at paying me $1,000 a month and wanted me to come down there to apply. Of course, I didn't. That seemed to be a little too far away. I was working various jobs, and then when Greensboro sent me a response back, I put in an application and went through the process. The person that probably had the biggest influence on me becoming a firefighter was my dad. He was a volunteer at Pinecroft. When he became a volunteer back in '71, and I would go with him to the station when we would have drills or there would be a fire. He'd take me with him, and we'd go to the station and pull duty. He had to pull duty, but I just hung around. And I'd say it was that influence, his influence, and being exposed to the fire service at that age had the biggest impact. That's what I wanted to do. The process for becoming a Greensboro firefighter in 1975 was you put in an application. They responded back fairly quickly and told me that I would have to go through a series of tests of written and practical. That was conducted at the police training room at the MMOB. It was a North Carolina Security Commission's test. So I took that, and then we had the little practical test where we take little pegs and put them in holes, and I'm assuming that had to do with determining your applicability to do hands-on training and manipulation, that sort of thing. And then after that, I didn't hear anything, so I called and said, well, you passed, but the next class, which was in 1975, had already been hired. If you wanted to be considered for future classes, we'll send you a postcard. And I said, well, sure, put me on the list. And in '76, late '76, they sent me a postcard and asked me if I was still interested, and I said, sure. And I wouldn't need to fill out another application. My original one was still good. And then in December, I got a letter to give them permission to do a background check, so I knew things were moving. And then I went out to the training center and did the physical fitness course. And then in January, I got another letter saying to go to Central Station to do an interview with Chief Kent and Chief Powell. Funny, as I walked in, I met retired Chief Wyrick coming out, picking up his old mail. And from that interview, that week, they called me and said, report to the training center on February 1st, 1977. So that was pretty much it. Let's see, it was the training class lasted for about, I believe 15, 16 weeks, approximately. Starting salary for us was $690 a month. Approximately 2 weeks into training, Faye Mayhem came in and we were doing our administrative work, and she announced that, congratulations, you were getting a raise. So we moved up to $723 a month right after that. So we were all pleased with that. Well, my training class members were Richard Beeson, Bill Brown, Steve England, Fernard Evans, Marvin Fanning, Larry Gaulden, Melvin King, Tony Lewis, Chuck Martis, Alan McPherson, Jim Mooney, Gary Murphy, Richard O'Brien, and Jimmy Williams. And then, of course, me.
That's pretty good, Chuck.
We were class number 28. Funny stories that happened in training. Well, back then, there wasn't a lot of, it was pretty serious. I remember my first day there, we were basically told, don't consider yourself hired. You have to get through this class first. So that, for most of us, me particularly, that sent a very serious message. And I took everything that I could seriously, and my classmates did too. And but as you go through training, we become closer as a group because we're working closer together and going through all the things that some of us experience, some of us have never experienced. And you notice that the training officers are kind of, loosening up a little bit. The funniest story for me in training was close to the end. We were burning houses over on Water Street. And I think we burnt 3. And we were we were done. We were sitting there watching the last one burn down, as you always do. And we were all just hanging around talking to each other. And then Chief Hilliard walks up, and I'm standing, I don't know, 10, 12 feet away from where he walks up. He walks up beside Fernard Evans and Melvin King. And he stands there, and he looks over at FO, and he says, "You know what this is?" Now, FO had a funny look on his face, and he cocked his head up to Chief Hilliard, and he said, "No, what is it?" He said, "This is a double stuffed Oreo." All of a sudden, FO grabs Chief Hilliard by the collar and throws him down on the ground. And my eyes are big, everybody's eyes were big, and our jaws are dropping. He's fired. He's gone. He's assaulting a training officer. And they go rolling down the hill like a Three Stooges movie. And then we realize Chief Hilliard is laughing as loud as he can. He thinks this is funny as all get out. We kind of knew then we had it made. But that was the thing. We got closer to the end of retirement, and so we got to know each other much better, and the training officers. Although that was probably humor that wouldn't go much today, but it just surprised us. But that's about one of the most things that I remember from training that really stuck out. But at first it wouldn't seem funny, but after we realized what happened, we had a good laugh out of it. So.
At any point during training
What felt special in training for me was all the training and the instruction that we got that I had never experienced before. Climbing the palm pier ladder, for one thing. Jumping out of it. I mean, I just saw stories of people doing that. I never had done that myself. Climbing up 50-foot ladders and tying off hose. We did ladders in February, and where it was sleeting. It was the worst time in any part of training that we had was in the beginning, because it sleeted on us, it rained, it snowed, it was extremely cold, and we were doing ladders. Doing that type of stuff and going out and doing the ladder exercises where we're climbing straight up and going back over, and those are just things that I had never done before. Fighting a fire I had done before previously when I was a volunteer, although I had not participated in the type of fire exercises that we did there. So, and we knew that when we would come out that we'd been very well trained. We were ready to go out and do our job, both physically and academically. We felt pretty good about what we were doing. Palm pier ladder, the best I remember, there were two sizes, a 10-foot and a 12-foot. They were made out of steel. It was a single rectangular piece of metal that went up, and at the end had what we call a gooseneck hook, and it had rungs like you would see on a telephone pole. And the purpose of the ladder was for a firefighter making a rescue beyond the reach of an aerial ladder. He could get this ladder and scale the building to reach the victim. To my knowledge, Greensboro didn't use it to do that type of, or I was never aware that it was ever used. But in training, it was used to build your confidence, because once you climbed that ladder, you weren't afraid to get on any other type of ladder. Because basically what you did is that you stood and you straddled the windowsill, you pushed the ladder to the next windowsill, you turned it, got it hooked, then you had to get out and you climbed it hand over hand on the beam, if you will, while your feet pressed up on the rungs to go up. And then inevitably, because everybody had trained, those windowsills were worn out, and when you got to the very top to grab the gooseneck, the ladder came out and then the hook on the end caught it, so you had to push it back in and get back on it. We had to scale the building, the tower, to the top and back down in 3 minutes to pass the evolution. The first time it was a little slower for me, but once we got enough practice on it, we all passed. So. First station assignment out of training, I was assigned to 3rd Platoon or C Shift, Station 4, Engine 4. At that time, Engine 4 was a 2-company station. The other apparatus was Truck 10, as it was known then, but that was the snorkel. My captain was Captain Richard Page. The driver was Tom Slatke, firefighter George White, and firefighter Robert Graves. Nicknames, yes, unfortunately, I can only mention the ones that are probably good for this interview. Igor, Grizz, Sherman, and Chump. Okay. I can't remember who gave them to me, but those are the ones that I remember, among others. Oh, certainly. Pranks at the firehouse. Well, let's see. The basic ones that I was a victim of and would soon pull on others was when you walked up to the kitchen sink and someone had put a rubber band on the sprayer, and when you turned the nozzle on, the sprayer would hit you and soak you. I was at Station 11, and when Central Station was decommissioned, Station 11 got their stove, which was a great big 6-burner, 2-oven, double-oven gas range. And when we would go in there to cook, sometimes the burners didn't always ignite when they were supposed to. There might be a delay, and then when it did, it'd shoot a flame up in the air a couple of feet. So we would go in and sneak in when we had certain people cooking. We would pick up the bench and drop it, and it would sound like something had blown up, and of course the cook would be up on the ceiling at that time because they thought that they had just been involved in a explosion. Probably the most one that I probably put the most work in was I had been the victim of several pranks, and I had a doctor's appointment, and I had come back to the station and they were gone. They were on a call. And I took the opportunity at that time. We had, back in those days, we had the steel round headboard beds. They sat off the ground about 3 feet. They were very simplistic. I took clothes hanger wire and I tied all the beds, the blankets, the sheets, to the bottom frame of it, to where they couldn't pull them off without really flipping the mattress over and untying the wire. At the same time, I knocked out the top where the bedposts and the inboard were at the very edge, so when they did that, the bed would collapse and they would have to put everything back together. So when I did that, when they got back in that night, we didn't get into bed till way after, 8 o'clock probably was the earliest that you would go get in bed. I went and got in the bedroom like, it had been done to me. And so I was acting, and of course the first one come in and he tried to get into the bed and he couldn't do it, and he flipped the mattress over, and of course there was a lot of adjectives being expressed at that time, and I was looking like, oh my goodness, what has happened here? The phantom has hit. Well, one gentleman came in the room and he saw what was going on. He said, I ain't worried about it, I'm just going to jump into bed. Well, when he jumped into bed, his bed collapsed. He went straight to the floor. I think they probably figured out it was me after it was all said and done, even though I did my bed too to make it look like I was a victim as well. But they were pretty smart. They know who did it because they know what they had done to me previously. But one I had got right much enjoyment out of, I bought this in the hardware stores. They used to sell these blow-up owls and snakes and stuff, and I got one of those, and we always had a garden out in back of Station 11. And of course when it got full grown, it was pretty thick, tomatoes and corn and all that sort of thing. and I blew up. This snake was about 6 foot long. I mean, it didn't look like anything around North Carolina, but when you saw it, it got your attention. And I put it out there in the garden, and a couple of people out there were commenting how they did backwards jump about 3 feet over tomato stakes because they thought they were getting ready to get bit by a snake. But that's about the extent of mine. There were some other things that I was either a victim of or did myself, but those are probably the most ones that I put a lot of work in, let's just say. Firehouse life and cooking and eating together. I was very fortunate. I got to work with some really great folks, great firemen. And we ate together, we slept together, dormitory style. We had the same bathroom, shower facilities. We watched TV, sports. Others had different, interests in different type of sports, but, we would all watch the same programs for the most part, and we got along pretty well, to be honest with you. It's very close-knit, especially if you were at a busy station, because you got to write a lot of calls and that sort of thing. But sometimes, as you know, back in the early or the 70s and 80s, officers rotate. Battalion chiefs move backwards and captains move forward on the shift. So annually you had a new chief and you had a new captain. So you had to be somewhat flexible and compromising and tolerant of others, because even though you may know them, but when you haven't worked with them before, it takes a little getting used to each other and working with each other. But as far as the guys on the shift, we always, back then too, when we rotated officers like that, we had good informal leaders, the ones that didn't hold a rank, but they were very influential. If they kept us in line, they kept the crew in line, they kept the shift in line. If we started going in a wrong direction, or if we had an issue, these guys would step in and resolve it before it ever got up. That's why, unless it was something serious, most of the stuff that probably would get up to the fire chief never did. It was just taken care of in-house amongst the shifts. And, we took care of our problems or our issues internally, right there. Was I a good cook? Again, I was fortunate to have been assigned and learned from some of the best cooks on the fire department. In my heyday, I could probably fix about anything. But although my specialties were fried chicken, making biscuits, sausage gravy, the firehouse meal obviously, and then hot dogs on the Saturday. Those were my, I could do those without even hardly thinking about it. Mashed potatoes and gravy, stuff like that. Hot dog tradition. The meal, it was homemade chili, homemade slaw, hot dogs, the not so healthy ones. But for those that didn't want to eat those, what we would do is buy a block of cheese, and they would eat a cheese dog instead. And some would put the cheese on top of the hot dog, but and mostly potato chips. Sometimes some guys would cook fries or make French fries. What days were supposed to have hot dogs? That'd be on Saturday. If that meal was fixed on any day other than Saturday, there would be somebody would inevitably say, well, tomorrow must be Sunday. That was kind of a way of picking them up. We don't have hot dogs but on one day, and that's Saturday. The dorm rooms versus the private cubicles. I guess it's just an evolution of, improvement within the fire service. Back then the stations were designed to where we would, again, probably like the military, we ate together, we slept together, we showered together. It was just that type of mentality. And and as the new generation comes along, that's just not something that they're accustomed to doing. And so, and with the advent of the newer stations and the newer designs, the cubicles provide, that extra sense of, I guess, security or privacy, if you will. Because the only difficult time that I remember when you didn't have a private place to go is if you were trying to read or study, particularly for a promotional exam. We didn't have computers back then, so the only form of entertainment was the television. And depending on who got in there first, you were going to watch whatever they had, or if they left, the channel got changed. Whereas the individual, they can watch what they want to. So, but with that, I do think maybe there might be a loss of fellowship, if you will, with that. But I don't know that it's that significant, but I can see where it would be detrimental or cause that issue. Families coming to the fire station, generally when I came on the fire department, that was generally on Sundays, not any other time during the week. Occasionally a Saturday, but mostly the weekends, or and even Sunday it was after 4, because we got our rest time between 1 and 4. But again, as the fire department evolves, that all changes. Family members come by, pretty much all the time, as long as it's after, normal working hours, 5 o'clock. But you still have to have limitations, because you have to be respectful of others, if they want to go. Again, I guess the private cubicles offer that separation where they can do that. But again, it's just a newer generation on how they participate in fire department life. And why is it essential to speak with retired firefighters? When I came up, retired firefighters would come by the station. Not a whole lot, but they would come by. Probably more so then than they do now. When you retire, there's a sense of loss when you leave. You've been doing something for most folks 30 plus years. And when you do leave, you'll try to find something else to do, like most of us. Fix everything around the house that didn't get fixed before, and that sort of thing. But at some point, you do want to go back. And when you go back, especially those places that you either worked at or you may know, primarily I think a lot of retirees just go back to places where they know people. Because I think sometimes they go back to the station and they look around and they don't recognize anybody and they don't know them. So for guys to sit down with a retiree and depending on what they want to talk about or discuss, it's beneficial because you kind of get an idea of what it was like back then. Some of the things that, wow, I'm glad we don't have to do that anymore, or, they were awful strict back then, and that sort of thing. Just get an idea of, historically how it was for a lot of the folks back then working with the fire service. The value in the retiree interviews, well, it gives us a chance to, talk about some of the things that we experienced growing up in the fire service. I know sometimes the old adage, when a lot of people didn't know me as a young firefighter, and so sometimes you have to tell them, I wasn't born this old. I used to be like you. I was young at one point in time myself, so, but it's hard for them to imagine you as a young firefighter. And I have to say that was, I would look at some of those older guys too and think, wow, you were a fireman at one time, but, they were. And they probably had to go through more, even though the technology back then probably wasn't as good as I have it, as well as the guys now have better technology than it was when I was, a young firefighter. So I think it's a way of just preserving the history of our fire department, and everybody's going to have a different point of view, a story, experience. And I would think a lot of at the end of the day, when the interviews are over, nobody regrets coming to the fire department, even though there have been some bad times. You know, everything wasn't as rosy for the years I was there, but the majority of it was. Would I do it all over again? Absolutely. And no, I don't think I'd do anything differently, except probably I would, I think I would have started trying to prepare myself for advancement a little earlier than I did. That was, and I felt like when I did, I felt like I was ready to at that point in time, but in hindsight, you know, I probably should have gotten more involved, doing more outside training activities instead of trying to, I don't know, being satisfied with the status quo at that time. But other than that, it all worked out for me. I've got no regrets. My first fire call, my first fire on the Greensboro Fire Department, it happened on the same day. It was actually my second day. I just turned, it was on May 5th, 1977. My birthday was on May 4th, so I just turned 21 years old. Happened at 710 Ross Avenue. It was a residential room and contents fire. Got off the truck, didn't wear an air pack, because I just come out of training. We trained on air packs, but a lot of the things that we did was without air packs. That's just how we trained back then. Mattress fire, plastics, simulated wood, that sort of thing. Got in there, put the fire out, came back out. I was irritated all day long. I was coughing all day long. So that was pretty much it. I mean, it was, then after that, you know, I was at 4, so I ran other calls as well and would in my career. Value in responding, for the fire department to respond on medical calls. First and foremost, our fire stations are strategically placed throughout the city to where we would be the first to get there and to provide that basic medical care to the people that are needing it. I think that's extremely important. And it also helps out Guilford County EMS as well. We can help them, you know, take care of the patient, and of course they're going to provide advanced medical care. But getting there first on the scene, I think is extremely important for the fire service to be involved with. Any medical call that stood out. I was assigned to Squad 3 for 5 years, and we responded to a variety of calls. Some were not so pleasant. Well, most of them were really not pleasant, but you know, some had a positive outcome. I mean, we saved the person, or we were there to provide the medical care that they needed at the time. I would say probably the one that probably stood out the most, we got a call one night. It was on South Imogene Street, right down the station. It was on the bridge over 8540, what they called the Death Valley section. And it had involved a car and a Carolina Steel tractor trailer. We got there, and it was a pin in, so we had to use the hearse tool, and we had to cut the driver out. We had to get to the door. There was, to our knowledge, there were 2 people in the car, and it was a pretty severe impact. They hit the bottom of the trailer. We got them out. We got the other gentleman out, which The other gentleman was DOA, but the other one was severely injured. But as we're going through the car, we notice there's something wrong here on the passenger side. And this was a Buick Riviera, and it had smashed it up. The whole front end had gone in, including the dash. Anyway, make a long story short, the passenger, there were 3 people in the car. The third person was up underneath the dash. We didn't see him. And of course, he had been severely injured. He was basically crushed due to the impact. But he had the force of the accident had forced him underneath, and then compounded with hitting. He was, it wasn't a very pleasant sight. And so, that's just one that I do remember. We were actually able to save one person, but that was a pretty horrific accident. Comes to mind. I know dealing with traumatic injuries or traumatic events in the fire service, in today's fire service, they have groups and people that are assigned to talk to the guys, especially if it involved one of our own. And I think that's great. When I was coming up, we didn't have that. But what we did have is each other, and that's how we would work our way through it. We would talk, our chief officers or our captains would talk to us about it. We'd talk to each other about it. So we got what, I don't know that it is better or worse, but by talking about it, for me somehow it made it better. That what I was seeing, he saw, and he's feeling the same thing I'm feeling, and so that's how we dealt with it, and we felt that's the most professional way to deal with it. To my knowledge, I don't know that there's during my time as a firefighter, we had anybody that had some type of issue with a call we ran, because we decompressed after it. Significant multi-alarm calls or fire calls I ran. Well, I spent most of my career at Station 11, aka the Animal House. I had been on multiple fires, rescues, medical calls, structure fires. I was on both tanker fires that happened in Death Valley in the mid '80s, and so we weren't. And I was an officer there as well as a fireman, and ran just about as many calls there as well as an officer. Probably the most significant fire that I was on back in that day happened in July. It was in the early '80s. I had traded with Frank Fortune, and it was in July, and it was a typical hot July day, and we get a call to the Carolina Theater. Well, I'm on engine 11 that day, and back then we rode, on the ladder companies, they rode only 2, the captain and the driver. That day it was Johnny Jones and Cliff Oakley. And then I was on the engine with Captain Ritchie, and I think it was I can't remember who I was on the engine with. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, we get there. Engine 4 gets on scene, says we got smoke showing. Engine 11 laid them a feeder line, and they got a report that someone is in the building, and truck 1 needs to do a search and rescue. Well, Johnny had already put the ladder up, and he was busy, so Cliff grabs me and said, "You coming with me?" So truck 1 laddered the building, and on the Exchange Street side of the Carolina Theater, there's a scuttle hole. And they laid the ladder, truck one laid in there, and me and Cliff went up the ladder. It's about 65 foot. And when we landed, we were basically on top. If you're in the Carolina Theater and you look up and you see the chandelier, that's where we were at. We were on that level of the theater. So we searched that floor, and it's hot and it's smoky. We can't see hardly anything. And then we go over to the side because they're really not sure where this person's at, and it's a scuttle ladder that takes you down to the unseen portions of the theater. So we go down that ladder, which is about approximately 20 feet. And then we get over to, there's some, I think it had to do with the stage. That type of stage had cables and weights and stuff. And when we got to this area, because it was so narrow, we had to take our air packs off, except for our mask, and hold them over our head to crawl to get through. Once we got to that area, our alarm goes off. So we got to go all the way back out, go back up the ladder, go across the ceiling, and then go back down and get another bottle. We do the same exact thing after getting the bottle. We get down to the bottom where our alarm had gone off, and then we get a call. They found the person. It was on the opposite side of the theater. So didn't really fight a whole lot of fire on that one, but it taxed me, and I know it did Cliff, but that was being hot and smoky, and I mean I probably lost about 10 pounds of body fluid that day. Let's see, near misses on fires. One of the first one was I was at 11, again, obviously, and the week before we had a fire on Elm Street at AAA Realty. It was coming out the windows when we got there, but we didn't really have any issue with it. We put it out pretty quick. Didn't have any problems. The week later, approximately a week later, could have been 2, we get another call to Earl Shy Painting, which is right up to less than a block from where AAA was. When we get there, the smoke is, it looks funny. It has a funny color, and it's not, it's on fire, but it's puffing. So we get over there, and I believe Engine 4 was there, and they opened the front door. We didn't open up the garage. We opened up the front door, and while we're doing that, we're getting a 2.5 off. And then the smoke came out, then it went right back in. So we kind of waited to let it do its thing, and then we went in at that point. And I believe it was me and Ken Smith were on the line. And we got pretty much into it. And I mean, again, dark, smoky, hot as all get out. We can see the fire. It's up in the attic, and we start hitting it. And then we move up a little bit more, and then we hear some radio chatter, get out, get out, get out of the building, get out of the building. About the time we heard that, everything started clearing up. So, well, what do I want to get out for? It's cleared up. We were probably about 6 foot from having the ceiling come down on us. That's why it cleared up, because that top of the floor had just crashed down and all the smoke and went out. So we backed out a little bit. Once we knew that it was structurally sound to where we could go in, then we went in and finished it. But that was probably one significant near miss. We weren't recording near misses at the time, but that was one of a few. And I'd say the other one, I have Ken Smith to thank for basically saving me. We had a 2-story residential fire. I'm not sure of the address. Again, it's blowing out all the windows when we get there. And we go up the top of the steps. We got 1.5 inches. And then when we hit it, of course, when you hit a fire inside of a structure, all the steam and the smoke all comes down on you, and then you can't basically see anything. We have a report that someone's inside. That when we were on the squad, so that's basically what we were trying to do, is put the fire out and then rescue us at the same time, if you will. Well, we're moving up the steps, and Ken is in front of me, and I'm trying to force the hose, and then I come running up there, and then I'm met with a hand. And this house had one of those floor furnaces. It was gone. And if he hadn't stopped me, I'd have went right down head first. I don't know that I would have perished, but it probably wouldn't have been fun. But anyway, those are just a few. It affected me, as far as affecting me, you know, what happened, I hate what had happened. But at the same time, there was something good that came out of it, because as a profession, we started getting probably the respect and the admiration that was long overdue for us. Not that it wasn't there. There were the people that recognized. There were people that did respect us and looked up to us, but it wasn't. It had diminished somewhat, and that brought that back. And that's the thing that I saw from it, that, you know, we were being appreciated, if you will. There is a story about that personally, that in 2000, I was on hazmat team, and we were being paired up with a member of Greensboro Police Department's bomb team. We were being sent to New Mexico Tech out in Socorro, New Mexico, where we would go out there for a week and learn about explosives. The reason that this school had become important, because Oklahoma City had happened, and some other things involving explosives. So it was a national movement to get those specialized response teams up to speed and understanding explosives and what they can do, and, you know, putting the pieces back together. And we had two very interesting training sessions that day. One was from one of the main investigators from Oklahoma City. The other was, in our class, we had two members of New York's hazmat team. New York's hazmat team, there's only one, and it's stationed in Manhattan. And these guys, one guy rather, he was on the first bombing at the World Trade Center that happened in '93. He was on that call. And he said, as bad as it was, and it did a lot of damage to the bottom of the building. But he was a typical New Yorker, so, you know, he had some colorful language. And anyway, make a long story short, I remember his message that I took from it. He says, they'll never bring those buildings down. They're too well constructed. It'll never happen. I don't know what they were thinking they were going to do, but they're not going to do it. Well, 9/11 happened. The police sergeant that went with me, his name was V.S. Hilton. I was at 11. He gives me a call one day, and he said, have you seen the list of the firefighters, the 343? I said, I haven't looked at it yet. I plan to. He says, you know who's on that list, don't you? I said, really? I knew he was talking about. His name was Martin DeMeo. He died in the South Tower. He was one of the first ones there. You know, it kind of puts things in perspective, you know, especially when he said that, they'll never bring them down. And my heart went out to his family, you know, because it was just unnecessary. Oh my goodness. Who were the people I looked up to and mentored? Well, that's a big list. I think every recruit never forgets their training officers. Mine were Chief Hilliard, Chief Hagler. I looked up to them. I learned a lot from them. They taught me a lot. And the good thing is once I got out of training later, they moved out of training, and I got to work with them, as on the line, and that really pleased me. I was happy to do that, to work with them out of training. Where do I start? I had a lot of good officers that I worked with, captains, chief officers. They helped me. A.B. Kimball, Kerry Hensley, Warren Ritter, Gary Church, Dan Banks, Gary Falk. Those guys, Chief Parrish, Elvin Parrish, Frank Jones, Jim Alexander, Sarge, when I went to the Bureau. There were just so many that, when they take an interest in you and help you with your career and show you the ropes and give back. This one's going to be tough. He's the watermark in my career. Crawford Jones. Crawford taught me a lot at a time that I needed it. He taught me, don't feel sorry for yourself. Don't take a whole lot of crap off people, but be professional. Always do your best. Always look your best. Be as professional at all times. Treat everybody fairly and give back, which has kind of been what I've always tried to do. Sometimes when I get where I was at in my life at that period of time, I think about back to him. Hardest part, there's been a lot of things that's happened over the years. A lot of things that go on that are hard to take, and you lose people. When I heard he got sick, me and Ken Smith talked, and we went to go see him because it wasn't good. And I wanted to go see him, and we both wanted to go see him, and we did. And we weren't really there. We were there to, I guess, say goodbye. That was tough. But while we were talking to him, he didn't want pity. He acted just like he always did. I was honored. I got to be his pallbearer. I miss him. Yeah, as far as dealing with the death, when we respond to the call and, we weren't able to do what we're supposed to do, that's bothersome, But sometimes you have to accept the fact that, you did all you could. And a lot of times that was the case. I don't know of any time that I know of or I was involved with that, we did something wrong that caused somebody to die or pass away. As I said before, we talked about that at the firehouse. That's with our officers, and sometimes if we did something that needed attention or whatever, our chief officers would bring it to our attention, and we'd work on it. Of course, that's evolved into, now we share that with everybody. It's a lessons learned, so we try to pass that information along. Close friends, that's always tough. It happens unexpectedly, especially when it's something that you're not expecting, and that's tough to deal with. Even though some people stay close, some stay closer, some not so close anymore, and you don't see them. But when you hear bad news about them, it's always tough to deal with that, especially if you're retired now, because you don't have anybody to talk to. Occasionally you'll pick up the phone, did you hear about such and such? And so that's kind of, I guess, how we deal with it. Well, my proudest moments in my career has always been to live up what Crawford taught me, to see the people that I helped, that I mentored, that I in some way influenced, achieved what they wanted and was successful. You know, there's a lot of folks that are there today that work for me. I feel somehow that I was an influence on them, or got them, or gave them advice, or pushed them or whatever to achieve whatever they want. I mean, to me, that to me is what my proudest moments are, as far as the fire service is concerned, is to just to live up to what he taught me. Well, take something that's happened that you never quite forget. There's several. Crawford's one of them. You know, we run so many calls back then, and some stand out that you'll never forget. For me, it was in the early 80s. I was a driver on Engine 11, and we responded to a house fire on then Ashboro Street, now MLK Boulevard. And we got there, we were right down the road. Engine 4 and Engine 11 got there about the same time. It was right there on the corner of Florida and MLK. House was, you could see flames, but it wasn't blowing out the windows or anything. We get there, we lay a line, lines come off, fire, they get in there, make an offensive attack, put the fire out. Of course, I was a driver, I wasn't inside, but everything was, as far as what I remember, went great. We were just there, Johnny on the spot. And it come, 3 kids were dead. We found 3. And they were like, the ages were like 1-year-old, 8 months, and 2 months, all on the same bed. The father had tried to go in and rescue him, but he got injured. I think, if I remember correctly, 50% of his body was burnt, but he couldn't reach him. And then I think he got one of his kids out. But that one, when you see kids, and there have been others involving kids, but not to that magnitude. That's kind of hard to deal with. And that's one of those calls back then. There's no formal support. We just talked about it at the station, and we just rehashed, was there something we could have done different? Was there something we could have done? And, unfortunately, I think by the time we got the call, those kids had already perished. So, firefighter roles and how they've changed, pretty drastically, really, compared to when I came on. Our class, because just give some perspective here, our class when we came on, we were the first class to have EMT certification to come out of training. Because as you know, in '77, we implemented the QRVs, or the rescue, or the squads. And since that time, every class has got to have that certification. And then, that transition to when the state had updated their certification, their credentialing program, there was more responsibility or requirements at that point. Now, and then you had the fire inspections. And then as you go even up to today's standards, these guys are and gals are learning how to operate fire apparatus, pump, aerial ladder operations, drive, which is great. Because when they come out, they're ready-made to do the job. Now, the other parts of that you don't get in training, dealing with firehouse life, dealing with others, that sort of thing, they try to help you prepare for that, but that's something that you learn over time. But today's firefighter has to have a whole lot more under their hat and to do the job now, particularly in the field of IT, computers, and that sort of thing. Well, I think to be successful, and your definition of that really relies on the individual. We all have our own points of view on that. To me, a firefighter is successful if they're doing what they love. If they're at the point in their career, wherever that's at, and they are happy and satisfied and confident in what they want to do, to me, that's your success story. You know, a lot of times back in when I came on, you know, it was, if you had been there 20 years and still a firefighter, you weren't successful. There was something fundamentally wrong with what you were, what you wanted to be, and how you progressed, and that's certainly not. I don't agree with that. I think everybody has their level of confidence, their level of achievement, and whatever that is, because not everybody wants to do the job of different positions, and not everybody wants to do or be higher up in rank for the responsibilities, and that's okay. Everybody should achieve what they're willing to put their neck out for, I guess. Family and faith have always been there in my fire service career. My wife was very supportive of me, helped me navigate through some of the things that you had to deal with, and very supportive. My two daughters were come and visit me at the station and come and eat lunch with me, primarily on the weekends. You know, they were busy in school, and so, and from that duty of service, I suppose, for 10 years, starting around 1990, I went on 10 mission trips during my vacation with my daughters. Started out with my oldest. We went to, for 3 years, we went to New Mexico, to the area of Shiprock, and did mission work out there, mostly building houses, or renovating, actually. And then did that for several years, went to Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina. When after Katrina, we went to Mississippi and New Orleans. So, all that's played a part, of giving back, again, trying to. Well, and after I retired, I went on another mission trip up in Kentucky. But that's the last one I had been on. So, my family to remember about me, that they were always a priority as far as what I did, and trying to support my family, and I tried to be at best as what I could be at whatever I was doing. In the fire service, I was trying to be the best that I could be, and do the best I could, and all in support of, or with the goal of, I don't know, making them proud of their dad and their husband. Well, hopefully they'll remember me. The fire department, that I guess my legacy that I leave behind and that I'm remembered for. I was professional at all times. I was predictable. There was no guessing about how I looked at things and how I liked things to be, and how I managed and supervised. I tried my best, and I guess it was probably my number one priority, was giving back. I was no different than probably everybody else on the fire department. I had pitfalls. I went off in the wrong direction. I made bad choices. I didn't do some things I should have done correctly, but you learn from them. And then I felt my obligation was to give that back, and so you don't have to step in that hole, or you don't have to go down that road, and let you fully understand what this job's all about, and be a professional. Do your best, and it's more to it than you think it is. It's not a job, it's a career, and you need to take pride in yourself and reflect on the fire department in a positive way at all times. That's just what I was taught and I took from my mentors and folks that I looked up to. The only thing that I would say at this point is just, I guess, kind of thank some people. There's two guys that probably no one knows in the fire department except me, Andy Butler and Chris Methvin. They were my classmates in Emmitsburg in the EFO program. We went all 4 years together. We developed a real close relationship. Together, we made it through it. Those guys were very helpful. I provided because I was the older of the group, so I provided the experience level and they provided the support. And we just helped each other out and made it through it and became real good friends. And still, obviously they don't live around here, but we still connect with each other and see each other. I'd like to thank all the folks that over the years we've worked together and provided, put up with my antics or my personality, if you will. And my last group that I was with, when I did retire, I was in special operations. Jim Robinson was my emergency management guy, my second in command. Craig Smith, he was my USAR guy. And Joel Wood, he was my hazmat guru. Those guys supported me, made my job easy, and we were very successful in my eyes anyway. They were a good bunch of guys, and I really appreciate how they worked with me and supported me all through those last days of my career. Chief Nugent, who supported me, I worked for him, and together we had a real good relationship at the fire department, and he supported me in my other duties and all through the time. And so, again, and I thank you for making all this possible. You, Larry Cockman, you've been a friend over the years. We've been on many escapades and had good times. And I want to thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
And thank my family for putting up with me for all those years.
All right. Thank you. You did great, Jack. Sorry we went over. In closing, the Greensboro Firefighters History Book Committee hopes you have gained a greater insight into the dangers, the challenges, and emotional events that have influenced and shaped the American firefighter.